I was polishing my late husband Frank's reading glasses when I heard those words that would change everything. "I'm broke because of you, Eleanor. You're bleeding us dry." At 72 years old, I thought I'd heard every kind of cruelty a family could inflict on the woman who had sacrificed everything for them. I was wrong. What happened next would shock everyone who knew me as the quiet widow who never asked for anything. But they didn't know something about me that was about to surface after 47 years of silence. The morning sun was filtering through the lace curtains of my Clearwater home. It's the same curtains I'd sewn by hand in 1987 when Frank and I first bought this little piece of paradise 3 blocks from the Gulf. My arthritic fingers moved slowly over the wireframes, each careful motion a small act of love for a man who'd been gone 18 months, but whose presence still filled every corner of our sanctuary. That's when I heard my daughter-in-law Jessica's voice carrying from the kitchen, sharp and cutting through the humid Florida air like a machete through sugarcane. She was on the phone with someone, probably her sister, using that tone she reserved for conversations she thought I couldn't hear. "No, you don't understand. I'm broke because of you, Eleanor. This whole situation is impossible. She's like this financial black hole that just keeps sucking money out of our lives. David won't admit it, but we're drowning because of her medical bills, her property taxes, her constant needs. Something has to change." I set down Frank's glasses with trembling hands. In that moment, something inside my chest cracked open, not from sadness, but from a kind of crystalline clarity I hadn't felt since Frank's funeral. They thought I was a burden. They thought I was the reason for their financial struggles. At 72, after raising David from diapers, after helping them with their down payment, after Frank and I co-signing their business loan, after decades of quiet sacrifice, they saw me as dead weight. But what Jessica didn't know, what David had apparently never told her, was that his mother wasn't just some helpless widow living on Social Security and memories. She didn't know about the careful records I'd been keeping for 5 decades. She didn't know about the properties Frank and I had quietly accumulated throughout our marriage. She didn't know about the trust fund Frank had established before his death. Most importantly, she didn't know that I had been listening to every word of their whispered conversations for months, documenting their plans with the patience of a woman who had learned that silence is not the same as ignorance. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, overlooked despite everything you've given, you're not alone. Please subscribe to hear more stories that finally give voice to the silent ones. These aren't just stories, they're the truth to many mothers carry quietly. I had moved into David and Jessica's Largo home 6 months after Frank's passing. Not because I couldn't afford my own place, but because David had insisted. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone right now. Come stay with us until you figure things out." What I thought was love was actually calculation. What I thought was concern was actually financial planning for my assets. The signs had been there from the beginning, small cruelties that I'd attributed to grief or stress. Jessica's eye-rolling when I'd ask for help reaching something from a high shelf. David's impatient sighs when I'd take too long getting ready for church. The way they'd change the subject abruptly when I'd enter a room, leaving me with a distinct feeling they'd been discussing me. 3 weeks into my stay, I'd offered to pay rent. "Don't be silly, Mom," David had said, but Jessica's quick glance spoke volumes. $200 a month seemed reasonable to me for a spare bedroom and shared meals. But apparently it wasn't enough to cover what they considered the true cost of my presence. The medical bills Jessica mentioned weren't even mine. They were Frank's final hospital costs. Bills that I had been handling through my own insurance and savings. The property taxes she referred to were for my own Clearwater home taxes. I'd been paying faithfully for 36 years without anyone's help. Her constant complaints about money seemed to revolve around expenses that had nothing to do with me. Yet somehow I had become the scapegoat for their financial irresponsibility. David owned a small landscaping business that had been struggling since before Frank's death. Jessica worked part-time at a dental office but spent money like she was married to a millionaire. Their house payment was twice what they could comfortably afford. Their credit cards were maxed out, and they'd recently purchased a boat they had no business buying. But according to Jessica's narrative, I was the drain on their resources. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was making scrambled eggs for breakfast, something I'd done nearly every morning since moving in, when Jessica stormed into the kitchen with a stack of papers in her hands. "Eleanor, we need to talk," she announced. "Not good morning, not how. Are you feeling today? Just straight to business. David and I have been looking at our finances, and we need to make some changes." She spread the papers across the breakfast table, pushing aside the ceramic salt and pepper shakers Frank had bought me in Key West 20 years ago. The documents were itemized lists, expense reports that she'd apparently been keeping, tracking every dollar they claimed to spend on my behalf. Groceries attributable to Eleanor, $437. Utility increase since Eleanor moved in, $18.09. Additional house cleaning supplies, $63. She read through her calculations with the precision of an accountant presenting evidence of embezzlement. David stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, saying nothing, not defending me, not correcting her wildly inflated estimates, just standing there like a spectator at his own mother's humiliation. "The truth is, Eleanor, having you here is costing us almost $600 a month more than your contribution. We can't sustain this arrangement. You need to either increase your monthly payment to $800 or find alternative living arrangements." $800 for a spare bedroom in Largo, Florida, and the privilege of being treated like an unwelcome house guest. In my own son's home. I looked at David, waiting for him to intervene to remind his wife that this was his mother they were talking about. The woman who had worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for his college education while Frank built his construction business from nothing. But David just stared into his coffee mug like the answers to life's difficult questions might be floating in the cream. "I see," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "And if I can't manage $800? Jessica's smile was sharp as a filleting knife. "Then we'll need to help you find a nice senior living facility. There are some lovely places in the area, very affordable. Very affordable. Code for the kind of place where you go to wait for death, where the food comes from industrial cans and the entertainment consists of bingo games run by teenagers doing community service. If this is making your blood boil, if you're feeling that righteous anger on my behalf, hit that like button, as respect isn't optional, even for the elderly, especially for the elderly." That afternoon, while Jessica was at work and David was pretending to look for new landscaping contracts, I sat in my temporary bedroom and made a phone call I should have made months earlier. Ronald Pemberton had been Frank's attorney and friend. For 25 years, the man who had helped us navigate every major financial decision of our marriage. "Eleanor, how are you holding up, sweetheart?" Ron's voice was warm with genuine concern, the first kindness I'd heard in weeks. "Ron, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. If something were to happen to me tomorrow, what would David inherit?" There was a long pause. "Eleanor, are you feeling all right? Is something wrong? Just answer the question, please." "What does David know about our estate planning?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, he knows about the house in Clearwater. Of course, Frank made sure he understood that would pass to you first, then to him. But Eleanor, there's quite a bit David doesn't know about. The rental properties, the investment accounts, the life insurance policies Frank maintained. You asked us to keep the full scope of your assets private, remember? Frank agreed that David should earn his inheritance through character, not expectation. The rental properties. I had almost forgotten about those myself. 2 small apartment complexes in Tampa that Frank had purchased in the early 1990s, when real estate was cheap and his construction business was booming. We'd been collecting rent for 30 years. Money that went directly into investment accounts I rarely thought about. Money that had been growing steadily while I lived like a woman dependent on Social Security and memories. "Ron, I need you to prepare a complete asset statement for me. Everything, properties, investments, insurance policies, the trust fund Frank established. I need to see the full picture. Of course, Eleanor, can I ask why this sudden interest? You've never wanted to focus on the financial details before? Let's just say I'm considering some changes to my living situation. 3 days later, I sat in Ron's downtown St. Petersburg office, staring at documents that revealed a truth I had somehow managed to forget in my grief and confusion. Eleanor May Hutchinson was not a poor widow dependent on her son's charity. Eleanor May Hutchinson was worth $2.3 million. The Clearwater house, $340,000. The Tampa rental properties, $890,000 combined. Investment accounts and retirement funds, $780,000. Life insurance policies, $290,000. Frank's pension, death benefits, and social security survivor payments I hadn't even been collecting. Nearly $3,200 per month for the rest of my life. I stared at the numbers until they blurred together. For 6 months, I had been accepting treatment as a financial burden while sitting on assets that exceeded most people's lifetime earnings. I had been apologizing for eating their food while I owned properties that generated more monthly income than David's struggling business. Eleanor, Ron said gently, Frank set this up so you'd never have to worry about money again. He wanted you to be comfortable, independent, secure. Why are you living like you're destitute? Why, indeed. Because grief makes you forget your own worth. Because guilt makes you accept less than you deserve. Because sometimes the cruelest thing about getting older is how the world convinces you that you're somehow less valuable than you've ever been. What I'm about to tell you next shocked everyone who heard it. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Because these stories of quiet courage are exactly what the world needs to hear right now. That evening, I returned to David and Jessica's house with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt since Frank's funeral. They were in the living room, Jessica scrolling through her phone while David watched a football game. Both of them existing in that comfortable bubble of people who believe their problems are someone else's responsibility. I've made a decision about the living arrangement, I announced, standing in the doorway with my purse still clutched in my arthritic hands. Jessica looked up from her phone with the expression of someone expecting good news, probably assuming I was about to agree to her $800 rent demand or announce my plans to move into assisted living. I'll be moving back to my own home this weekend, I said simply. David muted the television. Mom, are you sure? We can work something out about the money situation? Maybe $750 instead of $800. $750. To live in a house where I was viewed as a burden, to eat meals prepared with resentment. To exist in spaces where my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. No, David, I think it's time I stopped imposing on your family's finances. Jessica's relief was almost palpable. Well, if you think that's best, we only want what's right for everyone involved. What's right for everyone involved. As if my comfort and dignity were somehow secondary considerations in the equation of their convenience. I spent that weekend moving my belongings back to the Clearwater house, back to the rooms where Frank and I had built our life together. Back to the space that held 46 years of memories and love and quiet accumulation of wealth they had never bothered to understand. The house felt different now, not empty but expectant. Like it had been waiting for me to remember who I was before grief and loneliness had convinced me I needed saving. I spent the next month in productive solitude, reconnecting with the routines and spaces that had defined my life before Frank's death. I tended the garden he'd planted, organized the photographs he'd been meaning to put in albums, and slowly began to remember the woman I had been before I became someone's burden. The phone calls started in November. Mom, how are you doing? Over there, we haven't heard from you in a while. David's voice carried that forced cheerfulness people use when they're fishing for information. I'm doing well, sweetheart, keeping busy. Are you managing okay financially? I know you were worried about expenses. I wasn't the one who had been worried about expenses, but I let that slide. I'm managing just fine, David. Thank you for asking. A pause. Well, if you need anything, you know we're here for you. We're here for you. The same people who had itemized my food consumption and calculated the cost of my presence in their lives were now offering help I had never needed. The second call came from Jessica, 2 weeks later. Loner, I hope you're settling in well. I wanted to apologize if I seemed a little stressed during your stay with us. You know how it is with finances and everything? I knew exactly how. It was with finances. I had been reviewing the rental property income statements, the investment account summaries, the documentation of assets I had somehow forgotten I possessed. I knew that while Jessica was calculating the cost of my groceries, I was earning more in monthly rental income than she made at her part-time job. Of course, Jessica, I understand completely. Well, David and I were talking, and we realized we might have been a little hasty about the living arrangement. If you wanted to come back, we could certainly work something out. Maybe just $400 a month. We could make it work. $400 a month. 50% off the original burden rate. That's very generous, Jessica, but I'm quite comfortable. Here, are you sure? It seems like it might be lonely in that big house all by yourself. Lonely. The house where I had been happiest for nearly 5 decades was now characterized as a place of loneliness by a woman who had treated my presence in her home like an unwelcome infestation. This is exactly why you should never underestimate a quiet woman who's kept records for decades. You know someone who needs to hear this story? Someone who's been made to feel small in their own life? Please share this video with them. December brought the first real hint of their financial desperation. David called on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with the kind of stress that comes from bills you can't pay and creditors you can't avoid. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't take this the wrong way. I was arranging Frank's books in alphabetical order, a project I'd been putting off for 18 months. The familiar weight of his favorite novels in my hands grounded me as I listened to my son prepare to ask his mother for money. What is it, David? The business is having some cash flow problems. Nothing major, just a temporary situation. But I wondered if you might be able to help us out with a small loan. Maybe $5,000? I'd pay you back as soon as the spring contracts start coming in. $5,000. From the woman who had been too expensive to house and feed. From the burden they couldn't afford to support. That's quite a bit of money, David. I'm not sure I have that kind of cash available. It wasn't a lie, exactly. I didn't keep $5,000 in cash in my checking account, but I could have accessed that amount from any number of my investment accounts with a single phone call. I know it's a lot to ask, Mom, but we're really struggling here. The boat payment alone is killing us, and Jessica's ours got cut at the dental office. If we don't get some help soon, we might lose the house. The boat they had purchased while calculating the cost of my breakfast eggs. The boat that now represented financial burden they couldn't manage. Purchased with money they didn't have to impress people who didn't matter. I'm sorry to hear you're having difficulties, David. Have you considered selling the boat? Silence. Long, telling silence. We can't sell the boat now, Mom. We're upside down on the loan. We'd still owe money even after the sale. Upside down on a boat loan while itemizing their mother's grocery consumption. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. I'll think about it, David. Let me see what I can do. I didn't think about it. I knew exactly what I was going to do, but David and Jessica weren't ready to hear it yet. The calls became more frequent after Christmas. Jessica started joining the conversations, her voice sweet with manufactured desperation. Eleanor, we hate to keep bothering you, but the situation is getting pretty serious. David's been working 16-hour days trying to drum up business, but it's just not enough. We might have to file for bankruptcy if something doesn't change soon. Bankruptcy. The same people who had wanted to charge me $800 a month for the privilege of being treated like an unwelcome house guest were now facing financial ruin. That sounds very stressful, Jessica. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Well, that's actually what we wanted to talk to you about. We know you have the house in Clearwater, and we wondered if you might consider selling it to help the family through this rough patch. You don't really need all that space anyway, and the money could solve everyone's problems. Sell the house. Sell the home Frank and I had built together. The sanctuary we had created through 46 years of love and careful financial planning. To bail out the people who had calculated the cost of my existence and their lives. I'll consider it, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building behind my sternum. But I wasn't considering selling my house. I was considering something much more interesting. January brought the crisis to a head. David called on a Friday evening, his voice ragged with the kind of desperation that strips away pretense and reveals the truth underneath. Mom, we're about to lose everything. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We need help and we need it now. Can you please consider a loan against your house? It's just to get us through this rough patch. A loan against my house. They wanted me to risk the roof over my head to solve problems created by their financial irresponsibility. How much are we talking about, David? 50,000 would do it. Maybe 75 to be safe. It would save the house, pay off the boat, get us back on solid ground. $75,000. From the woman who had been too expensive to feed breakfast. That's a substantial amount of money to risk. David, what guarantee would I have that you could pay me back? Mom, come on. I'm your son. Of course I'd pay you back. We're family. Family. It's the same family that had itemized my food consumption and calculated the cost of my presence in their lives. Let me think about it over the weekend. I'll call you Monday. I didn't spend the weekend thinking. I spent the weekend making phone calls and reviewing documents and preparing for a conversation that was 30 years overdue. Monday morning, I called David and Jessica and asked them to meet me at Ron Pemberton's office downtown. I want to discuss the loan in a proper setting with proper documentation, I explained. They arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in their best clothes. Jessica carrying a folder of financial documents that probably detailed every aspect of their debt crisis. They looked nervous and hopeful and desperate in equal measure, like people who had finally found a lifeline in dark water. Ron greeted them with professional courtesy, but I could see the questions in his eyes. We had spent Friday afternoon going over my instructions, and he knew exactly what was about to happen. Please sit down, I said, gesturing to the chairs across from Ron's desk. I wanted to discuss your financial situation in a proper legal setting so we can all understand the full scope of what you're asking. David and Jessica exchanged glances. This was more formal than they had expected, but desperation makes people willing to accept any conditions for salvation. Now, I continued, you're asking me to loan you $75,000 too. Save your home and pay off your boat. Is that correct? Yes, David said quickly. With interest, of course. Whatever terms you think are fair. Whatever terms I thought were fair. From the people who had wanted to charge me $800 a month to live in their spare bedroom. Before we discuss terms, I think you should understand exactly what you're asking me to risk. I nodded to Ron, who opened the folder containing my complete financial statement. Your mother's assets, Ron began, his voice formal and clear, include the Clearwater residence valued at $340,000. 2 rental properties in Tampa valued at $890,000 combined. Investment accounts totaling $780,000. Life insurance policies worth $290,000. And monthly income from various sources totaling approximately $4,200. The color drained from Jessica's face. David's mouth fell open slightly, like a man who had just discovered he'd been swimming in deeper water than he'd realized. The total value of Eleanor's estate, Ron continued, is approximately $2.3 million. Silence, complete, absolute. Silence. Jessica was the first to find her voice. I had no idea. Eleanor, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't I tell them? The same people who had calculated the cost of my breakfast eggs wanted to know why I hadn't shared the details of my financial independence. You never asked, I said simply. You assumed I was a burden, so I let you make that assumption. You treated me like someone who needed your charity, so I accepted that treatment. But now you're asking me to risk my financial security to solve your problems, and I think you deserve to understand exactly what that means. David leaned forward in his chair. Mom, I don't understand. If you have all this money, why were you living like you needed our help? Because grief makes you forget your own worth, David. Because loneliness makes you accept less than you deserve. Because sometimes it's easier to be someone's burden than to remember you don't need saving. Jessica's calculator mind was working overtime, so when we were worried about the cost of groceries, I was earning more in monthly rental income than your part-time salary. And when we thought you couldn't afford your own place, I owned 2 additional properties you didn't know about. The weight of their assumptions was settling on them like dust after an explosion. This changes everything, David said. Though he seemed unsure exactly how, does it? I asked, does knowing I have money change the fact that you itemize my food consumption? Does it change the fact that you calculated the cost of my presence in your lives? Does it change the fact that you wanted to charge me $800 a month to be treated like an unwelcome house guest? More silence. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice calm and clear. I'm not going to loan you $75,000 to maintain a lifestyle you can't afford. I'm not going to enable the same financial irresponsibility that created this crisis in the first place. Jessica started to protest, but I held up my hand. However, I am going to make you an offer. David, I will pay off your house completely, the entire mortgage, gone. You will own your home free and clear. Hope flickered in both their faces. In exchange, you will sell the boat immediately and use every penny to pay down your other debts. You will close your credit card accounts. You will live within your means from this point forward. And you will never, ever treat another family member like a financial burden because you are too proud or too foolish to ask for help when you need it. David's relief was visible. Mom, that's incredibly generous. Thank you. Not finished. My voice cut through his gratitude like a blade. You will also write a letter of apology to me, acknowledging how you treated me during my stay in your home. You will acknowledge that your financial problems were not caused by my presence, but by your own poor decisions. And you will promise that if I ever need care or assistance in the future, you will provide it with dignity and respect, not resentment and calculation. The conditions hung in the air like smoke. And if we refuse? Jessica asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Then you will face bankruptcy or foreclosure or whatever consequences your choices have created, and you will do it without any assistance from me. I will continue living comfortably in my own home, collecting my rental income, and enjoying the financial security your father and I spent 50 years building. David looked at Jessica. Jessica looked at the floor. The mathematics of their situation were brutally clear. We accept, David said quietly, all of the conditions, all of them. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity doesn't have an expiration date, please subscribe for more tales of women who refuse to disappear quietly. Share this with someone who needs to remember their worth. These stories matter, and so do the women brave enough to live them. The house payoff took 2 weeks to process. I used funds from one of Frank's investment accounts, money that had been earning interest for years while I lived like someone dependent on others' charity. The boat sold for less than they owed. But Jessica's parents helped cover the difference parentally. Their financial crisis had been affecting more than just their immediate family. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 3 pages of handwritten apology that acknowledged every slight, every calculation, every moment when they had treated me like a burden rather than a blessing. David's words were careful and genuine, Jessica's slightly less so. But both recognized the cruelty of their behavior and promised to do better. 6 months later, I received a call from David on a Sunday evening. Mom, Jessica's pregnant. Congratulations, sweetheart. How are you feeling about becoming parents? Nervous? Excited? Grateful? A pause. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know there are no expectations attached to the question. What is it, David? Would you consider being more involved in the baby's life? Maybe spending time at our house again, helping Jessica when the baby comes. We know we don't deserve it after how we treated you, but we've learned some things about what family really means. I looked around the Clearwater house, at Frank's books arranged in perfect alphabetical order, at the photographs finally placed in albums, at the life I had rebuilt in solitude and dignity. I would love to help with the baby, David, but this time, things will be different. Different how? This time, I'll be coming as Eleanor May Hutchinson, not as someone's burden. I'll be coming as your mother who chose to help because she loves you, not because she needs saving. I'll be coming as a woman who owns her own home and pays her own way and expects to be treated with the respect she's earned over 73 years of living. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly how we want it to be. Then I'll see you soon. The baby was born in October, a little girl they named Eleanor Frances. After me and Frank, I spent 2 weeks helping Jessica adjust to motherhood, cooking meals in their kitchen and holding my granddaughter while she slept and teaching them both that taking care of family is a privilege, not a burden. This time, when they tried to refuse payment for groceries, I insisted. This time, when they offered me their spare bedroom, it was with genuine warmth rather than calculated tolerance. This time, I was there because I chose to be, not because I had forgotten my own worth. The rental properties continue generating income. The investment accounts continue growing. The Clearwater house remains my sanctuary, the place where Frank and I built something lasting and true. But now, I also have something else, a family that understands the difference between giving from love and giving from obligation, between accepting help and accepting disrespect. David's landscaping business recovered slowly but steadily. Jessica returned to work part-time after the baby was born, but their lifestyle had fundamentally changed. No more boats they couldn't afford, no more credit card debt, no more living beyond their means while blaming others for their financial stress. Most importantly, they had learned the lesson that Frank and I had tried to teach them through 40 years of quiet example, that wealth isn't just about money, it's about character. That respect isn't negotiable even when someone needs your help. That family means treating each other with dignity, especially when times are difficult. I still live in the Clearwater house, still tend Frank's garden, still arrange his photographs and read his books. But now I also babysit little Eleanor Frances on weekends, teaching her to identify birds in the backyard and showing her how to plant seeds that will grow into something beautiful and strong. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and the Gulf breeze carries the scent of jasmine through the windows, I think about those months when I forgot my own worth. When grief and loneliness convinced me that I needed saving rather than choosing. When I accepted treatment I never should have tolerated from people I had sacrificed everything to raise and support. But I also think about the moment when I remembered who I was. When I stopped being Eleanor the burden and became Eleanor May Hutchinson, again owner of properties, keeper of records, guardian of dignity earned through 7 decades of living with purpose and strength. The truth is, quiet women aren't just listening, we're keeping score. Remembering every slight, every calculation, every moment when we're made to feel small or worthless or dispensable. We're watching and waiting and documenting with the patience of people who understand that respect, once lost, must be earned back completely. And when the time comes to remind the world of our worth, we don't need to raise our voices or make dramatic speeches or demand attention. We simply present the facts, lay out the documentation, and let the mathematics of dignity speak for themselves. Frank used to say that the most dangerous person in any room is the quiet one taking notes. He was right about many things, but he was especially right about that. At 73, I am comfortable, independent, and secure. I am surrounded by family who Treat me with the respect I've earned. I am in control of my own story, my own resources, my own choices about how and where and with whom I spend my time. Most importantly, I am no longer anyone's burden. I am Eleanor May Hutchinson. And I am worth exactly what I have always been worth, $2.3 million in assets. But immeasurable in dignity, wisdom, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving 7 decades of a world that tries to convince women they become less valuable with age. They were wrong about that too. The revenge was sweet, but the self-respect was sweeter.